Institute about cryptocurrency and the future of digital currency. This is live coverage on C-SPAN.
What makes it all worthwhile to me is the name that they gave it on Twitter, Snowmicron. Anyway, the roads are clear enough that we all got here. We're sorry that we can't have you in the room with us. We changed this event to virtual pretty quickly after we started the planning because of where things were going with COVID. That word virtual reminds me of a windmill I've kind of been tilting at for a long time here in the cryptocurrency space. Regulators in particular, if my observations are correct, like to refer to cryptocurrencies as virtual currencies. The moniker comes from the virtual worlds that people play in online, and maybe those folks are more readily accepting of cryptocurrency. But when regulators say it, I see them sort of adopting a conceit that paper dollars and the payment systems we know and have are real. Cryptocurrency are a little bit fake. I think they're not fake, and with enough backfill of social capital, serious analysis, broad understanding of the technology, consumer awareness, well-functioning markets, mature companies, understanding of the economics, I think we'll see that cryptocurrency is very real. I'm a bit of a booster, and I think that our panel today is mostly made up of boosters as well. For competing views, possibly, and a deeper dive into some issues, I'll recommend to you an event that's coming up here at AEI toward the end of the month. My colleague Paul Kupiec will be hosting a session that asks, will digital currencies and fintech shape the financial system of tomorrow? We wish Paul's event good health and good weather. You can register to see it on AEI's events page right now. Our agenda in brief for today is first to hear from Christopher Giancarlo, the 13th chairman of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission and an early booster of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency from within government. His book is Crypto Dad, The Fight for the Future of Money, which is a fun tour of his time in government and his belief in this technology. I am thinking that I might get Crypto Santa out of today's event. I'm just going to leave that out there and let the hashtags do their work. He's going to join us. He's joined by a panel composed of Jerry Brito from Coin Center, Kara Calvert from Coinbase, and Miller Whitehouse Levine from the DeFi Education Foundation. I want to do two things in this discussion. One is to put hands on the elephant, as it were, and get these folks describing the technologies from their perspectives so that you all in the AEI community can get a better handle on what blockchain is, what cryptocurrencies are, and so on. Then I want to get to the policy issues. There is no shortage, and I think we'll have a lot to discuss. We will benefit from your participation out there online. If you have questions or comments for us, you can tweet them at us using the hashtag AskAEITech. You can email William Rao at aei.org, william.rau@aei.org. Sign him up for whatever mailing list you feel like as well. And if you want to comment just generally, you can use the hashtag crypto@AEI, crypto@AEI. Again, ask AEI Tech for questions that will send to me, and maybe I'll use, and crypto@AEI if you want to comment generally to the community. If you want to share around right now that you're watching this online, please do so, and you can help spur the conversation. We appreciate it. Now let me introduce Chairman Giancarlo. As I said, he was the 13th chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, an office President Trump nominated him to after his service as a commission member nominated by President Obama. This came after a very successful career in business and law in the area of financial markets and the technologies that support those markets. During his chairmanship, it was Chris Giancarlo's initiative, or perhaps his disinterest in saying no to financial innovation, that led his agency to adopt a leading role in validating and normalizing Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. He helped create the relatively transparent and well-functioning cryptocurrency futures marketplaces we see today. Along the way, he picked up the moniker Crypto Dad because he testified in Congress about listening to his children and the younger members of his family as they took interest in crypto. So Crypto Dad, The Fight for the Future of Money, is a good policy memoir. I've read a few. A book of mine was once complimented as the least bad policy book my introducer had written. It might be one of the least bad. Anyway, a good book and a fun one for people who are interested in how government works and sometimes doesn't work, and for how things unfolded in this important early stage of cryptocurrency's adoption. It's not a score settler, though we might like it to be. I don't think Chris has that in him. But he's frank about some of Europe's financial regulators, and that I enjoyed. Last year, Chris paid me the compliment of inviting me to participate with the Digital Dollar Project as an advisor on privacy. It's an unpaid position. I wondered, as I went in, how many months it would be before I orchestrated my departure, whether it would be a loud resignation or a relatively quiet one. I sometimes count my successes in how many papers I've withdrawn my name from, how many projects I've declined to participate in because they've wandered away from my principles. But consistently, I've seen Chris Giancarlo return in public presentations and congressional testimony to the importance of privacy, due process, and civil liberties when it comes to a central bank digital currency. The privacy principles that the Digital Dollar Project recently issued are quite good. So my dramatic departure from the DDB awaits another day. In 2016, Chris Giancarlo paid the compliment to AEI of coming here to this room to lay out an agenda for his leadership of the CFTC. My colleague Peter Wallison introduced him here. The stage was different at the time. It had a very space-age look to it, and Peter commented on that. It was the dais itself looked, the podium itself looked like a bit of a rocket ship. We're on a more normal stage than you were then, but we're complimented again, happy and thankful to have you back. Whatever the stage looks like, Mr. Chairman, take us to the moon.
Let's do it, Jim.
Please.
Well, thanks, Crypto Santa. It's great to be with everybody, great to be with all of you. It's a distinct pleasure to be back at AEI. And as Jim mentioned, in 2016, I was here to lay out the innovation embracing agenda that I adopted as chairman of the CFTC. And that agenda resulted in the CFTC overseeing the world's first fully regulated marketplace for Bitcoin futures, a market that remains the benchmark for liquid, transparent, and institutional trading and price discovery for crypto derivatives. Today, I'd like to continue my advocacy for a regulatory embrace of American innovation. And as I explained in my new book, I believe the financial system and money itself is changing right before our eyes. In fact, I think we're in a fight for the future of money, what it looks like, how it operates, who controls it, and ultimately what social values it carries. But before I tell you more about this fight for the future, let me first set the scene with 3 observations coming out of my time in public service. And the first of those is to note the obvious, that America's physical infrastructure, its bridges, its tunnels, its airports, its mass transit systems that were cutting edge in the last century have been allowed to age and deteriorate in the current one. And like Jim, I just rode the Acela from Newark to Washington, and the state of our dilapidated American infrastructure is on full display right outside the train window. Well, sadly, the same is true about much of our financial infrastructure, both in the United States and in developed Western economies. By that I mean systems for check payment and settlement, shareholder and proxy voting, investor access and disclosure, and even financial system regulatory oversight. Once state-of-the-art and global models in the 20th century have fallen behind the times in the 21st century, and in some cases, embarrassingly so. This aging financial system puts developed economies, like ours in the United States, at a competitive disadvantage to the likes of China that are building new financial infrastructure from scratch with 21st century digital technology. For example, it typically takes days in the United States to settle and clear retail bank transfers, while in many other countries it takes mere minutes, if not seconds. And it takes days to settle securities transactions. And it's ridiculously expensive to remit money overseas. It's often faster to move money around the globe by stuffing cash in a suitcase and hopping on a plane than it is to send a wire transfer. And nothing better reveals the limits of our existing financial system than the U.S. government's initial financial response to the COVID-19 pandemic in the spring of 2020. Tens of millions of Americans had to wait a month or more to receive relief payments by paper check, and more than 1 million payments were made to people who were dead. The second observation I'd make from 5 years in government is that the rapidly growing landscape of cryptocurrency and digital assets is being built upon a new wave of the internet. It's a phase that some people call the Internet of Value. Now, the first internet wave of the 20th century is considered the Internet of Information. Wikipedia is an example of that first wave, a massive, decentralized, online reference authority composed collaboratively by volunteers who share information and peer-reviewed entries. That first internet wave transformed so many human activities, from music, think Pandora and Spotify, television, YouTube and Netflix, retail shopping, Amazon and eBay, local transportation, Uber and Lyft, travel and leisure, Expedia and Travelocity, photography, Flickr and TikTok, communications, Twitter and FaceTime, social networking, Facebook and LinkedIn, and business meetings, which we're all getting to use on Zoom and Teams. Fortunately, that first wave of the internet was greeted here in Washington a quarter century ago by an official response that was enlightened and bipartisan. The White House and Congress came together to promote development of an internet of information unfettered by inapt federal and state law. This policy response is now considered to be called First Do No Harm. That first wave was superseded by a second wave, the Internet of Things, in which most every place we shop and dwell, everything we wear and drive, every device we engage with is being conducted over the internet. Well, we're now experiencing the internet's third wave, what some people call the Internet of Value. And in this wave, things of value like energy, agricultural and mineral commodities, contracts, stock certificates, land records, property titles, cultural assets like music and art, and personal assets like votes and election, even personal identities, can be stored, managed, transacted, and moved around in a secure private way from person to person without third-party intermediaries or gatekeepers. This third wave of the internet is shifting the medium of trust from large centrally managed institutions with legal authority to person digital handshakes powered by cryptography, tokenization, shared ledgers, and a network of personal computers and smartphones. Nowhere will this Internet of Value have a greater impact than in the area of financial services, where it has the potential to unlock scalable, disruptive innovation. It's naive to think that the internet will not transform financial services, banking, and money itself in the same way that the internet has transformed information, social interacting, retail shopping, local transportation, photography, and music. It's going to happen. In fact, it's already happening. Money is changing right before our eyes. Like text messages and photographs, money is becoming digital, decentralized, tokenized, and borderless. Thanks to stablecoins, value is now transferable around the world in nanoseconds, 24/7, 365, in a way that is increasingly decoupled from the traditional bank account-based system and correspondent banking services. And it is the private sector, not the official sector, that is leading the way to the future of money. It began over a decade ago with Satoshi Nakamoto's 2008 white paper. Today, more than 200 million people worldwide and more than 60 million here in the US are participating in this technological revolution, this Internet of Value, empowering creators, innovators, and developers while introducing needed competition to ever more concentrated financial markets. It may likely do to banking, payments, and money itself what the earlier internet wave did to information and communications and entertainment, and that is reduce cost and latency while increasing accessibility, inclusion, and economic freedom. Sadly, Washington's response to financial innovation this time around is a far cry from the earlier first do no harm. Rather, it appears to be first preserve the status quo. The President's Working Group on Financial Markets recently published a report on stablecoins. It's the first major indication of the Biden administration's policy response to the rise of digital assets. And overall, the report is highly defensive and reactionary, focused far more on what could go wrong rather than what could go right if innovation is properly channeled. It fails to declare any national imperative to harness digital asset innovation to upgrade our creaky, exclusive financial system to expand inclusiveness and lower costs for new generations of Americans. In my view, it's a missed opportunity. Which brings me to one more broad observation, and that is, if we act now, I believe we can harness this wave of innovation, this Internet of Value, for far greater financial inclusion, capital and operational efficiency, and economic growth for generations to come. But if we do not act, this coming wave of the Internet will lay bare the shortcomings of our aged, analog financial systems with potentially disruptive impact on our Western economies. I'm so convinced that the Internet is going to dramatically change the nature of money and possibly the values it represents, that almost 2 years ago, I co-founded the Digital Dollar Project. The project is a think tank devoted to the public discussion of the merits of a tokenized form of the United States central bank digital currency, what is known as CBDC, or what we termed a digital dollar. Our work is published at digitaldollarproject.org, and I invite you to take a look. The project is a not-for-profit partnership between the Digital Dollar Foundation and Accenture, the global consultancy firm. It's not a commercial venture. It has no business model to pursue. The project has assembled an experienced and nonpartisan advisory board in order to bring many perspectives and professional disciplines to bear. Jim Harper is a member, and we're proud to have him. The project recently named Jennifer Lassiter as its full-time director. Jen was with CFPB before that. The project is officially agnostic to continued development of stablecoins and other non-sovereign digital currency. The project does not propose direct retail digital dollar accounts with the Fed. The project's proposals are also monetary policy neutral and take no view on issues of money supply. It views a U.S. CBDC as a tool of monetary policy, not a policy expression. The project's mission is to encourage research and public discussion of the advantages and challenges of a digital dollar, to convene private sector thought leaders and actors, and to thoughtfully explore the policy implications of a U.S. CBDC if and when the United States adopts a digital currency. And to my mind, it may be more a question of when than if. Today, over 80% of the world's central banks are considering central bank digital currency. In my book, I list 7 reasons why. They are access to citizens' economic data, financial infrastructure modernization, financial inclusion, precision monetary policy execution, the rising success of stablecoins, and geopolitical influence. You can read about these 6 in the book. The 7th is the one I want to talk about to you today, and that's values. Money has always been as much a societal construct as it is a government construct. As such, money carries with it social values. In the case of the analog US dollar, those values have been free enterprise, free trade, convertibility, stability, and crucially, economic privacy for legal transactions. The Digital Dollar Project believes that in the future, a well-functioning central bank digital currency should be private. People should be able to use a US CBDC without making themselves subject to inappropriate government surveillance, censorship, or economic restrictions. It should be secure. CBDC should improve and not degrade people's security against theft, hacking, illegal seizure, unauthorized data mining, or fraud. It should be accessible. It should improve Americans and global dollar users' access to financial services. And finally, a US CBDC should be transparent. It should be run on systems that are operationally transparent so that the public can assure themselves about its technical functioning, security, and resistance to impermissible monitoring. These are some of the principles, privacy principles, that we believe should be encoded in a digital dollar. Yet other values of money are possible in a digital future, promulgated by both sovereign and non-sovereign issuers of digital money. Values such as commercial and political surveillance, data mining, economic censorship, and social credit scoring. Over the next 10 years, a battle will wage over what the digital money of the future, sovereign and non-sovereign, will look like and what values it will contain. This battle over the digital future of money will be waged by a range of players: the legacy financial system, big tech, new innovators, regulators, and central banks of both democracies and dictatorships alike. Yet there is another group that should be engaged in this battle, and that is you and I, citizens of a free society. It's one of the reasons we formed the Digital Dollar Project, to make sure that the voice of the private sector was brought to bear in the evolution of digital money. Looking back on the carnage of World War I, French Premier Georges Clemenceau is said to have remarked, quote, "War is too important to be left to the generals." In my book, I adapt Clemenceau's famous quote to say that money, especially the digital money of the future, is too important to be left to central bankers. And I mean no disrespect whatsoever to the Federal Reserve and its dedicated public servants. I just mean to say that whenever the United States does big things technologically, whether it's exploring outer space or exploring cyberspace, we've always done so in a partnership between the public and private sectors. Exploring the future of money should be no different. I said earlier that the Digital Dollar Project is agnostic about continuing development of non-sovereign digital currency. My personal belief is that CBDC should exist alongside non-sovereign digital currency. That is because the best protection against impermissible government surveillance of economic activity or restrictions on otherwise lawful transactions may be robust competition from well-constructed stablecoins and other non-sovereign digital money. On the other hand, private operators of stablecoins are not bound by the Fourth Amendment to respect individual privacy. They could easily be brought under political pressure to surveil or restrict politically incorrect transactions, say purchases of ammunition or abortion, depending on which political party was in power. In the same way that social media platforms are actively influenced today by the U.S. government about what speech can be hosted. Meanwhile, a U.S. government-sponsored CBDC should be expected to be subject to constitutional Fourth Amendment protections, to which private stablecoins would not be subject. You might think, therefore, of a constitutionally consistent digital dollar as a public option for Fourth Amendment-protected individual economic privacy. Perhaps the best approach is what I call a jigsaw approach to privacy, where no entity, no provider of the digital currency has all the information about a transaction, so that the CBDC doesn't become a tool of financial surveillance by either government or big tech, or both. In short, broad choice between sovereign and non-sovereign digital currency may be the most effective guarantor of economic liberty and individual privacy. I am convinced that the dollar, indeed every major central bank currency, will be rendered into the form of a sovereign digital token within a decade. And free peoples need to make sure that those digital tokens embody democratic norms and values: free enterprise, free capital markets, economic liberty, and free speech, and not competing values of data capture, economic surveillance, and censorship. Without inviolable protections for such civil liberties as freedom of speech and free enterprise and individual economic privacy, a digital dollar would be no more worthy of a democratic society than the currency of an authoritarian one. And that's why I wrote my book, to tell a general audience that change is coming, and the money of tomorrow will be very different than the money of today, and that we have everything to gain if we get it right: greater financial inclusion, lower cost, greater speed, and better control over financial information, and yes, constitutional protection of individual liberty and privacy. And we have everything to lose if we get it wrong. The fight for the future of money is afoot. The time to engage is now. Jim, I look forward to our discussions.
Listen very carefully. You can hear an audience across the land applauding at their desks. I remember, especially when I was younger, watching the PBS NewsHour, and the role of the moderator or the role of the interviewer was often to pull out the jargon and say, what is that? What is that? And even in that very accessible talk you gave, there were a lot of terms that we might want to go back to and spend some time on it. My goal in this panel is to be available to everybody. I think there are a lot of people who are experts who are listening in. Sorry to disappoint you, but we also want to bring along a lot of folks. So we'll come back to as we get into things on digging down a little bit further into what CBDC is, what a stable coin is, and so forth. But let's go down the panel and do a little more poppy introduction of the rest of the panel. Kara Calvert, you're with Coinbase. That's some kind of company?
We do something that's very exciting. I don't know, I've only been here 6 weeks. I'm still learning. No. Yes, we are the largest exchange in the United States. We have about 73 million users across the globe. And of that, we have about 7.4 active monthly users. So those are folks who are buying, selling, trading, holding crypto, all sorts of crypto. We have more than 100 assets on our exchange, which means you can buy and sell a lot of very, valuable assets, and ones that we believe are compliant with U.S. law. And that's a very important statement to make, I think. We work with a lot of institutions, more than 10,000 institutional investors, and we also work with about 185,000 developers. So doing exciting things on the blockchain as we get into some of this jargon, working on decentralized finance, NFTs, we can get into all of those. But Coinbase is a very exciting company, started in 2012, that has evolved a lot in those 10 years. So
give us a little bit on that review, right? Because there are thousands of crypto coins out there.
Yes.
Many of them are junk. I guess we've had thousands. We can probably say most of them are junk.
Correct.
We'll kind of give us a quick run through of how one qualifies to be on Coinbase.
We have a listing, a very comprehensive listing process that looks at compliance, legal, and security review. So one of the very big criteria is to make sure things aren't fraudulent, that they're not scams, that they are meeting certain criteria for consumers. Another really important point is that they are not securities. We firmly believe that everything on our asset portfolio here is not a security. And then third, to make sure that they're secure. So when you buy them, you can trust in that token.
Okay. You're from Wyoming originally?
Originally.
Is there something in the water in Wyoming?
I am so proud of my home state.
The state itself has produced crypto-friendly banking legislation. And
Absolutely.
Please.
Yeah, so Wyoming, I think, is very much leading the way in terms of how we think about crypto and Web3 and banking in the future of finance. We are thinking about it in a different, mechanism and understanding that it is changing. And Wyoming has always been open and flexible to change. And I think our legislators have really been thinking ahead, and our banking regulators in particular, I think, have been trying to be thoughtful about this issue. So I'm very proud to be from the great state. I worked for my hometown senator for 5 years and always wanted to be at the forefront of technology, and this is the way we got there.
Great. Jerry Brito, you've gone gray since you started at Coin Center.
Tell me about it.
Tell us about Coin Center real quick. How long have you been doing it? What are you up to?
Sure. So Coin Center is an independent nonprofit based here in DC, and we're focused on the public policy issues that affect cryptocurrencies and open permissionless blockchain networks. So things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the like. And we exist because these networks, as Mr. Giancarlo was saying just now, are open and permissionless by their nature. They are unowned, right? They're like the internet. They are a public good. Nobody owns them, and so therefore there's a bit of a collective action problem. Nobody has a self-interest in looking out for the interest of these networks as networks, right? You've got Coinbase. Coinbase has got very talented people who look after the interest of Coinbase, who builds on top of these networks. And you've got trade associations that look after the combined interest of companies building on top of these networks. But who looks after the interest of the networks as networks, their openness, making sure that they continue to be free from government censorship, et cetera, and who looks after the interest of the open source software developers building these networks, who usually don't work for anybody, who's looking after the interest of individuals who want to use these networks freely and privately. And so that's what Coin Center exists to do.
How many staff do you have?
We are a small team. We are 5 sort of full-time folks. We've been that way since the beginning. We're, at this point, looking to expand a little bit. So if you know anybody who is really good on the Hill, let us know. We've got, I'd say, 3 or 4 or 5 outside folks who are very engaged with us and might as well count as part of our staff.
Right. And I prepped you. I told you I was going to ask you this question. Who is Neeraj Agrawal and why?
So basically, aside from what I just said about Coin Center exists to be a platform for Neeraj Agrawal. But he is, for folks who don't get the inside joke, Neeraj is our communications director, and we've kind of have stumbled upon a communication strategy, which is go direct to the people and do so with a happy warrior perspective, and he does that remarkably well, communicating directly to folks, especially on Twitter.
I find him very enjoyable to follow on Twitter. He, I think, to use polite language, he can let you in on what the zeitgeist of the day is. It's a entertaining and I think a neat way of interacting with the public. Miller, you're a kid.
I am.
You're going to go gray at some point, or if you're
well
lucky,
on my way,
if you're lucky, bald. Tell us about the DeFi Education Foundation. What you do there?
The DeFi Education Fund is a 501c4 social advocacy group founded 5 months, 1 week ago. We are primarily focused on educating policymakers about the potential promise of decentralized finance, which is a kind of subsector in a way of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. We're internationally focused, not to front run my own announcement, but just hired a gentleman in Brussels to lead up policy efforts out there.
Perfect.
And our goal is to similarly represent open source developers of protocols that don't necessarily have permanent enterprises associated with them. So that's the DEF in a nutshell. We've got 4 full-time staff now, looking to enlarge in the group and also expand into APAC.
Where does the money for this fund come from, Miller?
So we are a very conventional 501c4 registered in Virginia, but the idea behind the creation of the organization came from what is called a DAO, which is an acronym.
We'll get into this, folks. We'll get into this.
A decentralized autonomous organization, which is a bit of a amorphous concept that's still being developed. But the net is that a bunch of people who care about DeFi got together on the internet and said, putting together a group solely focused on decentralized finance protocol issues makes sense, and we should give a 501c4 some money to do that.
And are you going to beat Coin Center at their own game, or what's your niche?
Absolutely not. Our niche is DeFi.
Okay. So not the whole ecosystem.
Not the whole ecosystem.
This part of it. Okay.
Although there are a lot of overlaps at the foundations of all of this.
Well, the cryptocurrency community has really, I think a tweet of yours at one point, Jerry, when this stuff got in the infrastructure bill, all these differing, variegated interests got together and said, we don't like that. And that was really interesting to see where many DC industries eat their own. This is a crowd that you would expect to actually dine on each other. Really came together. Fascinating stuff. Maybe we'll get back into that too when we get to the policy stuff. But let's figure out some of the technology. When I was Miller's age, and the internet was young, I came across a website, I think it was like How Stuff Works. And I consumed a lot of material there. What the heck is email? SMT, it's a protocol, and you understand that a protocol you can't really control, and you can't say who gets to use it and who doesn't, and so on and so forth. That helped me understand that you can't do spam control certain ways, and you might do it certain other ways by affecting the protocol or whatever it may be. Anyway, so I want to get our audience to eat some technology vegetables, if you will. Learn what's under the hood. I'll just there are all kinds of ways to come at it, but I'll just pick the data structure called blockchain. Can one of you just give me your version of what the heck a blockchain is?
So, so to the technical audience at home, you need to speak in general terms for the rest of the audience, so forgive me for what I'm about to do.
You don't need to savage Jerry for being imprecise, okay, folks?
I don't want to look at my Twitter mentions after this.
Right.
But look, a blockchain is basically a word for what essentially is a shared distributed database, right? So it's a big ledger, a big Excel sheet that lots of people can read and write to. And you can have private blockchains and public blockchains. Private blockchains means that you're going to have an enumerated list of people who have the permission, because they've all agreed to sort of look at, basically form the contract to give each other permissions and set rules that they enforce outside of the system, legally, what kind of things you can write and how. That's a private blockchain. More interesting, I would think, is a public blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum or where the set of people who can read and write to the ledger is open. Anybody can just download some free software on their computer and begin to use the network and read and write to it. And so then if you have a ledger that is open and permissionless, you can do all kinds of things. The sort of first and most obvious application is money, because moving around, payments are basically just a settlement. It's just moving, amounts from one cell to the other, or changing the amounts in a cell in a spreadsheet. And so if you can do this in an open way, you get something like Bitcoin. You can send money from person to person without any intermediary, just by using this ledger. But it's not just money. It can be anything else. You could settle stocks, property, but even beyond that, so many of the things that we take for granted as Web 2, right? So Twitter or Facebook, Expedia, all the things that you mentioned, right? What are they at root? They are a ledger. What is Twitter? Twitter is just a ledger of users and their tweets, and who follows who, and who blocks who. That is it. You can reproduce these in an open fashion so that there is no one company that controls and permissions who gets to use them. So in a nutshell, that is a blockchain.
All right. And a block is what? What sticks blocks to each other?
Somebody else do that one.
What's a cryptographic hash then? Who wants it?
Well, from my understanding, cryptographic hash is basically when there's a confirmation from all of the different holders, whether they're node holders, whether they're involved in the confirmation or the validation, that they go in, they say, yes, that's what happened, yes, that's accurate on the block, yes, that's accurate on the block, and then it's validated, and therefore it's hashed to the block. And so you connect each block with a hash, and you go down the line, and that's where you get the chain. You can have situations where you may have co-chains. You can have situations where you may have a fork in a chain because somebody said that these are not the same and we are not going to validate this, and so it forks. But at the end of the day, it's how you confirm each block, and that's how you hash it.
Right, hashing. So a hash of a block is a string of characters saying that the contents of this block, if you can take the contents of this block, hash them using this algorithm, you're going to get this string of characters. Do that over and over again. You can prove that that block was not changed since the time it was created. Hashing of hashes then proves that all the blocks in the chain are consistent all the way throughout.
And Jim, that's one of the breakthroughs here, because it's the consensus of the users that are confirming a transaction is taking place, as opposed to a central intermediary. Citibank says your money went through, or some other third party confirming things. What makes it so unique is a consensus basis of the users of the group are confirming.
Let me say to folks that CryptoDad is a book that will get you into this pretty well. It's a good beginner's introduction to this stuff. You can read it through and
for
get
a
an
general
idea.
audience. It wasn't written for those Twitter files that'll down to the very finest point, because that wasn't the point. The point was to get a general audience started along the journey.
And that idea of open and permissionless makes me need to ask about P2P. What the heck is that, Miller, and how is it used to secure open blockchains or to administer open blockchains?
So in a blockchain structure, you have a group of computers connected in a peer-to-peer way, reaching consensus over shared data. We've hit the shared data, we've hit the consensus. The peer-to-peer network means that each computer either participating in the consensus process or attempting to, taking the example of Bitcoin, send Bitcoin from one wallet to another, are communicating with each other without having to rely on an intermediary to effectuate the transmission of information. So using the internet, a really awesome peer-to-peer network, one can talk to any computer directly around the world, and that is a security feature, I think importantly, because it decentralizes who is tracking the information the shared data that everyone is agreeing to.
You know what I'm not going to do today? I'm not going to ask anyone to talk about the Byzantine generals problem. Let's just not do it. Let's get into mining, though, and that'll take us into cryptocurrency. Someone talk about mining and cryptocurrency. So we got the data structure. What I've tried to do is get us the understanding a little bit of this data structure. The way I describe it is a ledger with pages. A blockchain is a ledger, a block is a page. It's a starting point. But cryptocurrency adds a little something because it inclines people to spend effort on securing this.
So I'll give it a shot.
Please.
But before I do, I don't want to fight the hypo, but I want to say this. That when you have I have a car, and I know what it does. What it does is very cool. I can drive it anywhere I want, right? But I have no idea how the engine works. And that's fine. If I wanted to know how the engine works, I know I could go and find out. And there are better resources, AI panels, for me to find out how the engine works.
What?
Where I could literally learn the technical details and build one from scratch if I wanted to. So just with that caveat, I wouldn't, personally, when I talk to folks, I try not to focus so much on the technical details of how it works, because, by the way, there are many cryptocurrencies and they work differently.
Yep.
But mining, again, at a very high level, is the process by which you add blocks to a blockchain. And so the idea is, let's take Bitcoin as the example. There's a new block added to the blockchain about every 10 minutes. And the way this process works is that you've got a peer-to-peer network of everybody who's on the network. And suppose that I'm one of the peers and I say, I want to send some money to Jim. I want to send them $100 worth of Bitcoin. So I take Jim's Bitcoin address. I take an address to which I have previously received more than $100. And I say, send money from this address, and I have a password, a private key that controls that. Send $100 worth of Bitcoin to Jim at this address, and I sign that sign that message with my private key, and then I broadcast this message on the network, which means I send it to my nearest peers that I'm connected to. Maybe it might be 3, 4, 5, and then they further it on to the 3, 4, 5 they're connected to. And pretty soon, everybody on the network is seeing this. Some of the nodes on the network are going to be what are called miners, and these are special nodes that are dedicating computer capacity to what they do is basically they collect all the transactions that they see over the last 10 minutes that are coming through. And those are basically the transactions that will be in the next block in the blockchain, the next page in the ledger. And you've got hundreds, thousands of miners around the world all doing this, all basically collecting essentially the same transactions they're all hearing at the same time. And they're racing to be the first one to solve this cryptographic puzzle, to be the first one to solve it. And if they're the first one, their block is the one. And they choose the order of transactions. It's very important. Do you want to go say something?
Blockchain and Bitcoin go together like chicken and eggs. Mm-hmm. But unlike chicken and egg, it's very clear which came first. In other words, it was the blockchain that's the breakthrough notion of a globally distributed, universal, accessible ledger. But then you have to ask your question, okay, if we're going to get people to write to it, to create each new block, how do we reward them?
Right.
Well, we can go back to the old-fashioned system of getting some central intermediary, a bank or somebody else, to actually pay people to do these transactions. But that defeats the whole purpose. What we're trying to do is get away from central intermediaries. Let's come up with a reward system that rewards people for writing to the blockchain. We'll create something called Bitcoin, and we'll distribute it algorithmically based upon who successfully solves this puzzle, does the mining, and adds the next block. So we create a decentralized reward system to do it. So you've got blockchain as a breakthrough, and then on top of that, Bitcoin is the reward system for doing it, hence the two of them go together.
I would also add that I think that we're focused very much on proof of work and concept of mining. And there's an entirely, I think, a more emerging area here, which is called proof of stake. And so when you think about staking and mining, they're very similar when you talk about a reward system. If you think about it with that rubric, it becomes very easy to understand that when you validate or when you can provide consensus for a block, you can stake, you can mine, but at the end of the day, it's the participation in the network, the participation in the blockchain that rewards you for that activity.
Yeah. Mining and staking are design features. They're not flaws, they're not mistakes, they are designed to get away from central payment intermediaries.
I just want to add and underscore that there's magic here, and it sounds complicated and technical, but it is kind of answering the question: why does the baker bake bread? Why do miners mine? There's incentive. You have to incentivize a group of totally disparate, unrelated actors to be essentially dedicating computer power or in staking a different, we won't go into it, but different system to essentially all be rowing in the same direction. You can reward them for doing that, and I also think it's a carrot and a stick situation. To mine on Bitcoin, you have to have a pretty large capital outlay to buy equipment to essentially compete for the opportunity to write the next block to the chain. That is further incentive to follow the rules of the network, so to speak. You have skin in the game, so to speak, and you're also vying for a carrot by following the rules of the network, even if nobody has any connection with each other, and it's just people around the world with an internet connection.
Well, and to me, some of the magic here is that this incentive got to be a thing that people value. There's some magic moment where everyone said, like, I want that. We talk about it as a coin. Technically, under the hood, it's not a coin. It's you might describe it as the power to control the movement of material on the ledger. But Terry, you wanted to talk more about
the metaphysics of what the actual thing is.
Right.
It's crazy, so we won't go there. Two things I want to say about mining that I don't think we've touched on yet that I think a layperson trying to understand needs to get is that the purpose of mining is to validate the transactions and add them to the chain in such a way that they are secure. And it is all of this work that you are doing that provides that security, right? So the miners are doing something very, very valuable. They're basically being, as Mr. Carlo was saying, the PayPal, except they're being the PayPal only for the next 10 minutes, right? They get to say, these are the valid transactions, and they're here in this order. We're going to add them to the block. But they have to have an incentive to expend so much work to be that. And so that is the reward that they get. And the second thing I want to say is the reward has to be in a native currency, in a currency native to the network that they are mining. A lot of people who I explain this to say, well, why don't you just get paid in dollars? Well, if you introduce dollars into the system, you've introduced you've removed everything that makes it permissionless and open because you've introduced all of the. So the reward has to come in a token that is native. And so if people see that there's value, people want to use the ledger in order to read and write transactions to it, whether it's to send each other money, whether it's to do decentralized file storage, whether it's to run smart contracts, then there's going to be demand for the native currency in order to use the network. And so that demand gives it value. And that value is what miners compete to acquire one day.
Yeah. I'll defend the premise or the idea of trying to get people into the technology some. You got to know enough about your car so you don't get ripped off at the mechanic.
That's true.
We're trying to help y'all. And this discussion, for those tuning in, this discussion is very, very basic and generalizes and we've misstated and all kinds of things for the sophisticates. But it's probably really complicated and really hard to grok for folks that are just getting in. So those of you just getting in, we're going to do a lightning round next, where we're going to just hit the top of a whole bunch of terminology. What's lightning?
Okay. So lightning is a layer 2 solution to the Bitcoin network. Okay. So what does that mean? Look, Bitcoin blocks come around every 10 minutes and no faster. Okay. Guys, forgive me. They can't come faster.
No savaging Jerry on Twitter.
They can't come faster. They come slower. The point is they're about every 10 minutes, but not very much more than that. And they are small, right? They're like 2 megabytes, or a little bit more. And so in that amount of space, you can only fit so many transactions. There's no way that you're going to approach the kind of scale of numbers of transactions that a Visa or MasterCard, what's the word, approve, right? Because they don't settle, by the way. Settlement still happens 2 or 3 days later with Visa and MasterCard. But anyway, you're not going to have, Visa, MasterCard can do, I don't know, maybe you guys know the numbers, millions of transactions per second. You cannot do that on Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin does not scale to be that kind of day-to-day payment system. It's more akin to a settlement-based layer. So can we build a system on top that is super fast, lightning fast, one might say, that can settle to the Bitcoin blockchain? And essentially the way it works is we can, if Kara and I transact frequently, we can basically open a channel between each other where we each have a balance. And when we open that channel, that is a transaction that's written to the Bitcoin blockchain. But then once we have the open channel, we can transact back and forth. I can send her $5, she can send me back $1, I can send her 1 penny, she can send me back and forth as much as we want. And none of that costs anything. It's, it actually does cost a tiny fractions of a penny. And only once we're done, or once Kara disappears, or I disappear, whatever, do we settle to the Bitcoin blockchain, and then our respective values are, so it's using Bitcoin as the settlement layer.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And this lightning round is going to be more lightning.
More lightning.
It's going to be more lightning-ish from here on out. What's an NFT? Someone other than Jerry
take
knows
that.
NFT.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and unlike Bitcoin that is value to value fungible, they're valued at different amounts based on what it is. So it can be, we're opening at Coinbase an NFT marketplace where folks can actually go release their NFT. So that could be, if you're an artist, in terms of a musician, you could go release an NFT that maybe is your fan club. And you then would have access to certain things. You might have access to tickets, but at the end of the day, it allows that musician to monetize their content throughout the block. So not just about their one ticket that's then resold on a third party and then resold again and then resold again. Rather, it's on their block and they can actually manage that. So there are lots of different ways you could have an NFT, but it comes down to a value assigned to this one thing.
Miller, what's going on with the apes?
Apes are an NFT project that essentially does exactly what you just described. There is a provably unique token, a one-of-one token associated with an ape drawing. And just like a certificate of authenticity, people ascribe value to that.
I am less a booster of stuff like that than the basics we talked about ahead of this.
Can I say something about NFTs? So yeah, I think my colleague Niraj drew a lot of scorn recently when he said on Twitter that the NFT monkeys have set us back years in explaining this stuff. But here's what I think he meant. So NFTs are an incredibly important innovation, but they've been associated with their first use case, which is fine, which is a lot of art, a lot of different cases like that, collectibles, things like that. But let me give you another example of an NFT case being used right now. The Ethereum naming system, ENS. Okay, ENS is a competitor to the domain name system, right? So I own jerryburrito.com. What does that mean to say I own it? I don't own it. I basically have a registration with a registrar who in turn feeds up to ICANN, which is a centralized global body. And at any moment, I can be booted, jerryburrito.com can be taken away from me, right? I also own jerryburrito.eth, okay? And that is an NFT that I own, and nobody can take away from me, and I can point that to my website, and I can use it to receive payments. I can use it to receive other NFTs at that address, whatever I want, and it's mine, and nobody can take it, and that's just my identity. There are lots of other use cases for NFTs beyond just art.
You're reminding me just some old guy talk, which I do more and more all the time for some reason. You're reminding me of the policy stance taken in the Clinton administration around internet governance and the domain name system. We could spend hours on that one, but the domain name system, the government didn't try to take and hold and own and grab. They did it's sort of a mushy decision, but they put the domain name system for the internet with a nonprofit corporation in Santa Monica, if I remember correctly, and there's You can, if you're really prim about it, you can wonder about so much power over finding things on the internet being there. But that was way smarter, I think, than the Department of Commerce saying it's ours, because that would have created a real power grapple that has not happened on the internet. And getting to name resources on the internet is a huge important thing. So you brought me back to the 50% level on NFTs. Web3, I have no idea what this thing is.
Me neither.
We'll skip it then.
I think you've addressed it quite a bit, Mr. Giancarlo, in your opening remarks.
Web3 is about getting back to the point, I think, of the original promise of the internet itself, and that is empowering individuals as opposed to empowering big tech companies. What we found is that with the rise of big tech, they're in command of our data. They're in command of our information. And what do we get for that? We get nothing. We supply them with all of our personal information on Facebook or on Amazon when we shop or in other ways. And they take that information, they use it for their own commercial purposes and often to influence us. The notion of Web3 is to get back to, I think, the idea of the original promise of the internet, of taking back control in our own hands. Europe introduced something called the GDPR, Privacy Protection Law. It allows you to either opt in or opt out of allowing big tech to own your information. That's just really the starting point. What we really want to get to is, as Jerry said, where we own it outright. And anybody wants to know if I'm web surfing late at night on the latest banjo design, somebody wants to pay me for that, give me a discount on my next banjo, or just pay me outright for that information, fine. But don't do what's done today in Web 2.0, is every minute my information is being auctioned off to the highest advertising bidder to then take that information, and they're paying these big tech companies for it. So Web 3.0, I think, is really very exciting. It really honors the very premise. And then when we go from an internet of information to an internet of value, we very much want to make sure we own our things of value. We want to own where we store our identity, the most important thing of all, where our value is, where our money is, where our retirement is. So that's what Web 3.0 is, in a very generalized way.
It's a fascinating coincidence. I also do a lot of late-night banjo design survey.
It's a rare thing, and people pay a lot of money.
We should discover this here today. Smart contract. Is it a contract?
Well, maybe I can take this one as well. As a lawyer, right, we studied contracts in law school. What is a contract other than a series of instructions? It's really a series of algorithms, right? And if you can reduce those instructions, reduce those algorithms to a piece of code, you suddenly have what? You have a smart contract that could actually, with further inputs as to compliance with those instructions, determine whether the contract has been complied with. Now, if you can put that into a distributed ledger, you could actually have a remarkable series of societal interactions based upon a agreed set of protocols or instructions. Hence, you have smart contracts.
And just to make it very simple, I think if we want to go out and you have a boat that I want to buy, we can put that into a smart contract. We put those parameters in, and then it executes. And the important part about that is it eliminates the intermediaries that we often have now in contracts. And I think that is the really powerful part. It's not just about payments. There are other executions that will obviously happen. But payments and that exchange of value is a very, I think, attractive one, and one that's simple for folks to understand.
We talk about old folks like you and me, Jim. Let me give a really simple example that old folks can understand. Wills and trusts. What is a will other than a set of instructions, usually to people that are going to survive you to do certain things? So I want to leave money, say, for my children when they reach the age of 30. If I die sooner, keep an eye. I may want certain conditions, like they've got to be, say, sober or get a college degree in order to do that. Well, today, how do we do that in an analog world? I sit down with some lawyer, I sit down with some executor, and I say, okay, I'm writing down what I want. I've got to trust you after I'm gone to do all this stuff. Well, what if instead of all that, I put it actually into a smart contract? I actually connect my digital money to a smart contract so that when my kid hits 30, they do a breathalyzer test on their phone, their college degree is programmed in, and the money's released to them. No need for an executor, no need for all those intermediaries who, in most cases probably honored my wishes, but maybe they didn't. Well, this case, it's all automatic. It's all digitally executed.
I feel New York and a lot of other legal centers like shivering at this
Well,
prospect.
I mean, and it's even bigger than that.
Jerry, you want to gloss on that or something else?
I mean, so I agree generally with everything that was said, but I kind of want to give a different spin, which is smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts.
So not the same.
So, well, no, but everything you described is what a smart contract is. I think people hear the term smart contract. Number one, they think it's legal. It's legally binding in some respect. And in many ways, you look at a smart contract, and there's nothing legally binding about it. So it's not really a contract in the way that we think about contracts as a meeting of the minds, memorialized, et cetera, et cetera. And
They say there, Jerry, is yet.
Potentially.
Right? Because
Potentially,
remember,
yes.
the internet first started, we didn't know whether that
Absolutely.
click-through was a legally binding agreement, and it is now.
Yep, totally. The other thing is smart. So I think a lot of the smarts that traditional contracts have is in the interpretation that we do rely on third parties to do. So, things like reasonable or best efforts, these are things that have to be interpreted, and that machines who, just do it automatically are not best suited to. That said, you're right, yet, because you can have DAOs that maybe the way that things are decided is there are basically incentives for people to align with what is ultimately the right choice, with a majority choice, you could say, and get a good result. So just wanted to just caution people to not think of these things necessarily as legally binding.
Let's have Miller do DAO now, because he said it first, and I want to know more.
Well, I'll start. I would just wrap up smart contract. Even more broadly, I think of smart contracts as being computer programs that, given input X, Chair Giancarlo's kid, passes the breathalyzer and graduates from school, you have an extraordinarily high degree of confidence that output Y will happen. In this instance, assets are transferred to Chair Giancarlo's kid's account or wallet.
So, but generally, a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. Be quick, and if you can, tell us the story of the DAO.
DAO, like I said at the outset, is kind of an amorphous concept. How I think about it is a group of folks over the internet who are collectively trying to accomplish some shared goal, be it the provisioning or the maintenance of a computer program, a smart contract, or the collection of money to go buy the replica of the Constitution. I kind of think about it as the internet native corporation in a way. It's an entity, whatever that means, that is attempting to accomplish some objective, and anyone who chooses to, it's permissionless, may participate in that, at least the reaching or striving for that objective.
Let me take what you said there and start to segue over into policy questions. Because you said an interesting phrase, internet native corporation. The blockchain that we talked about and cryptocurrency, it's kind of everywhere and nowhere. That's how I sometimes describe it. It's everywhere and nowhere. You can take your cryptocurrency in and out of a jurisdiction without anybody patting you down and taking it from you. You can get together with others and create an internet native corporation. One of the interesting challenges, and this again takes us into public policy, is that corporation is everywhere and nowhere. It's not subject to taxation in any jurisdiction. It's not subject to regulation in any jurisdiction. Necessarily, I must add well then, Jerry, tell me why I'm wrong, or Kara.
Oh no, I just wanted to say that you probably are, whatever activities you're doing will be subject to regulation and taxation somewhere. It's just that it might be very difficult to enforce that, or you might get away with not being caught, but it probably is.
Another plug for Wyoming is actually addressing this issue, right? They've talked about how would a decentralized autonomous organization become an LC. And in fact, they have laws on the books that allow that to happen in a way that provides that clarity for some. Because in general, there are many DAOs, I think, who are interested in remaining fluid and nebulous, but there are many who actually want to accomplish something and they want to do it in a compliant and legal way. And so even though you don't have the same intermediaries as you may have a corporation, there are governance structures, there are ways to make decisions, and there is a legal path forward, at least in Wyoming and other places. I think other places are trying to catch up with that, including at the federal level.
In this role of trying to simplify, I want to ask you what an LLC is. That's something. Chris, you had something more you wanted to say.
I think nomenclature is really important. We talk about a corporation. You talk about something that historically was a grant by a government to grant you limited liability for the actions of the assembly. When you talk about an assembly, you're talking about something that under our Constitution has enjoyed certain privileges from government control, freedom of assembly, right? And so what I would caution those who are proponents of DAOs is watch your nomenclature. If you talk about a corporation, you are automatically saying we're subject to the government's grants of rights to activities. If you talk about assembly, you're talking about something that's historically enjoyed freedom from government control. And so I think the terminology is very, very important.
I think it's very true, and I think this is why Miller kept saying it's a nebulous concept that's still trying to be defined, right? Yeah. When we first started hearing about the word DAO, there was a much tighter sense of what DAO meant. Today, DAO is just a Discord group, a chat group that happens to have a Ethereum address associated with it, right, that they can spend money. And that looks a lot more like a general partnership where there is, with no protection against personal liability. I would say, just a food for thought, maybe the first DAO really is Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself. It's decentralized. Agree. It's autonomous, and it's organization in the sense that it's a self-organized peer-to-peer group of people who assemble, very importantly. Participating in Bitcoin is you're exercising your right to assembly to produce this function.
There's a cute story that folks who aren't familiar with it should look up about the DAO that got together to try to buy a copy of the Constitution recently. Hate to spoil it, but someone else got it in the auction, which was too bad. More practical. So this question of how a DAO might fit into the legal structures that exist now is one of the mind benders, one of the challenges. But let's move to more practical stuff. One that was out there when I was working closely on these issues was taxation. Who wants to talk about IRS treatment of cryptocurrency? The look on Kara's face is, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, or she's really eager.
No, I think this issue came to the fore over the summer, and Jerry and I worked on a lot of these issues as the Senate was actually addressing some of these. I think the IRS, there is a challenge here, right? I think we need clarity from the IRS on how to treat some of these assets and whether it's property or currency. So there is a challenge there. I think the bigger challenge that we're seeing, and we saw this year in Congress, was the lack of education on how some of these work. Going back to making this accessible, this panel accessible, and what some of these terms mean, I think that until you understand some of that technology, it's hard to understand how to tax it. And one of the big issues we had during the debate was, should we be requiring reporting for things, and who should be reporting for things like DAOs, for things like decentralized finance, for mining, for staking, for doing all these other activities, providing these services. A company like Coinbase, we want to report to the IRS. We want to be in compliance. We provide lots of tax services for our customers to know when they bought, when they sold, how much they made, how they can comply. But I think the challenge is working with the IRS to make sure that we're educating and working as a partner with them to help them understand how to do this and then implement certain rules or change certain rules in a way that enable an innovation and enable people to be compliant.
So the reason I blanched the question of what about tax is that where to begin, right? It's so many issues. Here's sort of the gloss. The gloss is that the different agencies in the federal government that have related to crypto have sort of done so as the technology has affected them, right? They've sort of regulated. So FinCEN came first, right? And in each case, these agencies have gotten smart quickly and then regulated or opined or interpreted and have done so pretty well, right? So FinCEN's AML rules are just spot right to date.
AML is what?
Anti-money laundering.
Anti-money laundering. Okay.
Yes. The FTC obviously did a great job. Even the SEC, I understand people want to have better clarity. I think what they want is different law, but generally has gotten to a good kind of, the IRS and tax policy of Treasury is the one area of law that it's just a complete mess. When they've put out guidance, the guidance conflates things like hard forks with airdrops. I'm not going to explain what those things are, but these are two very different things. And literally, in guidance to the public, conflate topics that makes it impossible for somebody who wants to file their taxes appropriately to do so. And then you get, most recently, to the infrastructure bill that passed recently, but over the summer, there was a series of crypto-related tax provisions included in that, lots there, and we can't possibly get into all of it, but essentially, it assumes that this technology operates in ways that it does not. And this is not good for the regulators and enforcers, because they're not going to be able to do what they think they want to do. It's not going to be good for users who aren't going to be able to pay their taxes when they want to do it the right way. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Let's talk about the federal government's institutional response to this burgeoning technology. Kara, Coinbase had a suite of policy proposals they put out recently. If you want to put them out there, let's chew on them for a while.
Yeah, so we released the digital asset policy proposal over the summer and into the fall, and it was the result really of over 70 meetings with lawmakers, policymakers, regulators, staff, stakeholders, industry stakeholders, really to understand what the market needs right now. And I think where we settled is this idea that this market has changed. So it's, as a 15-year veteran of technology policy, I really feel strongly about being technology agnostic. I think what we try to accomplish here is that it's not the technology, while it's changing the markets, it's changing the consumer expectations. So our first pillar, it's changing the risks. Our first pillar is, as we see intermediaries, the need for intermediaries, the need for certain third parties, as that changes, we need a different framework. We need a different mindset. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is thinking about a single regulator. This could be in any of the existing agencies, CFTC, SEC, any range of them. I think, but the idea is that single regulator needs to have a mission that promotes innovation and a mission that understands the technology. Because how can you regulate decentralized finance if you don't understand it? So it's really this idea about understanding the technology, understanding where the risks are and the intermediaries lie, et cetera. Part of that is having, you would actually have a license or authorization for a marketplace for digital assets. So a company like Coinbase could go in and register as an exchange, a marketplace for digital assets, a DMA, and we could actually then provide a digital asset through the life cycle of its life. At the end of the day, then we would also have an SRO that could help, I think, the agency be more nimble.
SRO stands for what?
The self-regulatory organization. There are a number of them in the government that have proven extremely successful and helpful. Along with that, then, to our third pillar, it would be focused on consumers. So disclosures, robust, appropriate disclosures. We would have fraud and market manipulation prevention to really make sure that we're understanding where the risks are and helping to enforce against those. And then third, thinking about the efficiency and how the markets actually run. So along with that, then, our fourth pillar is really thinking about interoperability and fair competition. And frankly, all the agencies should be thinking about fair competition. I think that we've seen folks that have done that very, very well, and I think we need to make sure that moves forward. So those are the four pillars. We can get into the weeds on those, but I think that's something we initiated this and threw out, and I know many people think that a single regulator is just, pie in the sky, total rocket ship idea. But at the end of the day, we're seeing it across the world in a global environment, and it's not crazy to think about a single regulator. It's happening around the world, and it's happening in a way that is attracting innovation and attracting this industry, because in the U.S., our fractured system is actually pushing folks overseas. They don't know where they should release a token. They don't know how they should do it. They're afraid of getting stomped out. And so I think we really need to think about how we create a streamlined system that has clarity and easy to comply with, or at least provides flexibility for compliance and actually gets us to a point of true innovation in the United States.
As you know, I love getting into the weeds, and I want Chairman Giancarlo to get in there on whatever you're interested in.
Well, so first of all, tip my hat to Coinbase and their principles, which were excellent, really well done, really thoughtful. They're absolutely right that I believe there should be a single regulator. The problem is you need to look at realpolitik when it comes to Washington. The Ag Committee's got the CFTC. The banking committees have the SEC. And if you think that's just a sort of a measly committee structure, that goes down to, agricultural powers in the Midwest and banking powers on the coast. And those dividing lines are societal and they go deep. And neither side is going to yield, right? So the CFTC got out in front of this first. Now the SEC seems to have the baton. But that battle is not going away. The SEC is not going to run with this. The CFTC is not going to yield. This is a long-term thing. So before I left the CFTC, in a long conversation I had with House leadership at the time, I came up with an idea which is still germinating, and I think ultimately I believe it's the path forward. So if you'll allow me.
Please.
I think the path forward is to recognize the power structures that are Ag Committee, CFTC, Banking Committee, SEC, and instruct the two agencies to do something they haven't yet done before, but there's a basis for it. And that is to take the ad hoc cryptocurrency working group that I and Jay Clayton created between the CFTC and the SEC and develop it into a bureau, a crypto bureau, which would have joint parentage of the SEC and the CFTC, but it would have its own authorization, its own financing coming from the two committee structures. It would have both sort of a commission structure formed from the two agencies, but then a head who would be independently nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, that would be the crypto czar, the crypto leader of a crypto agency. And it would take from the CFTC its longstanding mandate for innovation, for deep and competitive liquid markets, anti-fraud and manipulation, but product innovation. The CFTC, just a little plug, had overseen the development of more new products than every other market regulator in the world combined, over 14,000 in the less than 20 years. It's a pretty remarkable track record of innovation. But it would also take from the SEC its mandate for consumer protection, for disclosure, for registration, right? So take these two mandates, combine it in one bureau, and give that bureau oversight over crypto. And there can be a role for others. We can take something maybe from the consumer finance mandate that CFPB has, although the CFTC also has a consumer finance mandate that's worked pretty well. So we'd have to work through that. There's a lot of politics involved. But it goes to your point. At the end of the day, you can't have multiple regulators. In fact, we've tried that. There are products that are jointly regulated by the CFTC and the SEC, and ask anybody. It's a disaster. You need one regulator. You need one regulator that's crypto-focused, that has crypto expertise. One last point. We absolutely need self-regulation alongside federal regulation. There are some in Washington that say, oh, this is way too much the Wild West crypto is to have self-regulation. Are they kidding? Did they not see the commodities markets back in the day? Did they not see the early days of the SEC, the early days of the equity markets? And yet we have self-regulation in securities. We have self-regulation commodities that goes before the CFTC. It goes back to the 1850s. We have self-regulation. And the proof is in the pudding. U.S. commodity markets, U.S. equity markets are the envy of the world. They're the world's largest, best regulated, best functioning, deepest, most liquid, provide the best price discovery. So what about self-regulation has not worked to the benefit of our country in the equities markets, in the bond markets, in the commodities markets? Self-regulation works, and it should work in crypto as well, alongside federal regulation.
There are a bunch of places I want to get in the 10 minutes that remain. Let's talk a little bit about stable coins in terms of monetary policy. I know that's an issue. You talked about the Biden administration stablecoin report. I know nothing about monetary policy. Someone educate me.
Where do we start?
Oh, yeah, and in 90 seconds or less.
Yeah. So where do we start? I mean, central banks are the guardians of monetary policy. The national currency, the amount of national currency, whether the currency is being restricted or expanded to meet national needs. And so the question is whether non-sovereign currencies provide a challenge to the central bank to be able to carry out those functions of managing a currency, managing how it is transmitted, what are the transmission mechanisms for it, and of course, what is the amount of currency in the system. Mm-hmm. Hope that helps.
I mean, just quickly, I'm not sure there's a connection between stablecoins and monetary policy right now. Because, I mean, several Fed governors, I think maybe even Jay Powell, have said there isn't really much. Because stablecoins as they exist today, and let's talk about the US-based regulated stablecoins, all they're doing is essentially keeping a bailment of $1 for a token that they give you. And that dollar, if they're regulated typically by as a New York trust company, I think like the last remaining big money transmission license kind, USDC, is moving to a trust-based, super safe, liquid assets is what's invested in. So really, there's no monetary implication. The question begins to be raised, number one, when you have stable coins that are not subject to supervision by any regulator, and so maybe there's a little bit of shadow banking happening there. So that's as much monetary policy as it is systemic risk that might exist. And then the other thing is, stablecoins, I think, form the basis of a potential future digital dollar. And so you can imagine banks being given the authority to issue dollars as tokens, as opposed to deposits as they do today. And so then maybe there's some, but that doesn't happen today. So
I think that one important point is when we think about digital currency and we think about how, outside of CBDC, so a true stable coin, there have been some pushes to, as the PWG report suggested, it should only come from banks. I think that there is probably a role for both banks and other non-banks to play in this space, but there is probably a real role here for regulators and others, and particularly, I think, Congress, to think about how do we ensure some safety and soundness, but also consumer knowledge, education, whether it's disclosures or any other mechanism, to ensure that as we think about, what is backed mean? What is in fact backing this, and how can you make an educated decision on whether or not to use a stable coin? Those are some of the questions I think that are valid and we should be thinking about.
I love to segue, but I'm just going to pivot. Let's talk about energy consumption. You referred early, Kara, to proof of work, which is the highly consumptive energy using way of securing a blockchain. There are competitors like proof of stake. This isn't a discrete policy issue that I know of right now. Maybe it is, but it's in the air all around. When you see people who sometimes really, really dislike crypto, maybe because crypto Twitter is a really, really obnoxious place, they go to the energy consumption, and there are real issues there. Maybe I'll stick it with you, Miller, because we haven't heard from you in a minute or two, but you want to talk about energy, or anyone else can take it too.
Well, I think I'll start by saying, I think any negative one considers about a system has to be balanced with the positive. These things aren't operating in a vacuum. Every system that provides societal good can also have negative externalities. I think that, to your point, critics of the energy consumption of mining might be less convinced about the potential societal benefits of cryptocurrencies broadly, and so it's easy to look at some downsides. Mining, proof of work is critical to the operation and the security of these decentralized ledgers, and I think on net they're societal good. I also think that over time a lot of this is going to follow Murphy's Law. We'll get more efficient. We're going to create more energy in a sustainable way, I hope. And I think it comes down to where one's priorities lie.
This issue also...
Let me try to answer your energy question with a lightning answer, if I can. Hey. Let's be honest. Proof of work uses a lot of energy. Use a lot of energy, but because it's using a lot of energy, it does what any demand thing does. It's actually driving renewables to a great extent. We start from the point that you use a lot of energy, but it's actually driving renewable usage. It also needs to be put in context. Our current analog monetary system is very mineral extractive. Running all those ATM machines across the country uses an enormous amount of energy. So it needs to be put in relative terms. We're moving, in many cases, as Kara notes, to proof of stake, which uses much less energy in many other cases. But for the time being, the truth of the matter is proof of work does use a lot of
This
energy.
one other thing I'll just mention is being a Wyoming girl. Again, I know I keep bringing it back to Wyoming. All roads go back to Wyoming. As a daughter of the energy state, and thinking about how these actually intersect, it's exactly where we're seeing intersect. We're actually using energy better in the state of Wyoming to provide some of these mining services. We're capturing natural gas. We're capturing burn off. We're using wind. There are all sorts of ways that we're actually leveraging renewables to do this mining, even though it does use a lot of energy, but we're finding ways to do it.
For a moment here, looking down the panel, I was seeing Kara shake her head yes, and Jerry shake his head no. Jerry.
No, here's the thing, is that I think everything everybody said so far, I completely agree with, but I would say that we don't have to make any apology for the Bitcoin's energy use, okay? What Bitcoin does is valuable, okay? And valuable things have inputs, including energy, right? So I was reading recently that 40% of all CO2 emission in the U.S. comes from climate control. So we're enjoying air conditioning right now. We could have this off and we'd probably be fine, but we don't want that. So we choose to expend electricity. And what Bitcoin's mining process does is secure a network that has billions of dollars, a trillion almost, and that is valuable, and it's worth the energy that is being expended to protect it. And if we are serious about addressing risks of climate change, looking at cryptocurrency miners and saying, oh, you guys are bad, is not the way to do it. You're not a serious person talking about climate change if that's what you're doing. What you should be doing is opening 100 new nuclear power plants in the United States, okay? Tapping geothermal energy in the United States, okay? Opening up exploration that's ripe for exploring.
And shutting down all those ATMs.
Or doing that.
Using tons of energy.
Do more, don't do less.
To Jerry's point, the history of human development is the history of increased energy consumption.
Yes.
We got to figure out a way to make energy sustainable.
All right, left-wing crypto Twitter, Savage Miller. Let me do another pivot in my agenda for the rest of the minutes we have together is to ask you, thanks to our audience, and I've kind of tried to weave in some of our audience questions.
They'd be quiet though. There's so much noise.
You've been very well behaved from our perspective. I want to talk about this question about the digital dollar, and then let's do some privacy, because we only barely touched on privacy. What's the difference between a digital dollar and the electronic transactions we have now? Online bill payments, mobile wallets, and et cetera. What's so good about
90% of the money we use today is basically banknote money, basically bank credit. The digital dollar is not relying on the credit of a particular bank institution. We rely on the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So that's the big difference. In fact, it's a return to the type of money that humans have used since the dawn of time until the last 400 years or so, and that's tokenized money. Humans have used tokens, whether it be clay tablets or metal discs with an emperor's heads on it, from the beginning of time, and are very comfortable with that system. With a token system, it's the identity of the token itself that needs to be validated, not who you are, where you bank, and how much money you have in your bank. The problem with the token system in an analog form is it turned out to be local. Bankers in Amsterdam, when they went to Venice, couldn't use their Dutch guilders. And so they got basically credit from the Bank of Amsterdam to go to Venice. It solved the local aspect. And that's the money we use in 90%, whether you use Zelle or Venmo or credit cards or debit cards or a check. In every case, you're not using a token, you're using the credit of an institution. And in every case, your identity needs to be validated. We need to know where you bank, how much money is in your bank. Did your bank credit another bank? That system is actually relatively slow. It's relatively expensive because you got to pay for all that validation. And most critically, it's very exclusive. If you do not have identity, you can't use that system.
So today's system is a surveillance superstructure.
It's a surveillance superstructure.
Carrie, you said you were eager to report to the IRS. Come on, settle down a little bit. But
only on appropriate information.
All right, good. Thank you.
Right, exactly.
Subject to entirely legal
Exactly.
process, right?
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, Jim.
I don't think we're going to have time to get to some of the privacy issues that are out there. But I remember coming into Bitcoin thinking, this thing is private, and then realizing, the privacy is fairly brittle, right? Because there are actually firms out there that follow the blockchain, and you can unpack pretty easily. I won't say pretty easily, with a lot of skill, They can unpack who has done what on blockchains. There are things out there like zero-knowledge proofs that may allow people to transact anonymously and without publishing even the amounts of their transactions. So there's a whole world of exploration to go on privacy. As I said up here, and I'll say again to you, I really appreciate that you're looking at the digital dollar as being consistent with American values, including the Fourth Amendment and privacy. So I appreciate that very much. I appreciate all of you panelists joining us today, and all of you out there. We can just hear your applause beginning to crescendo. As I close, there's a couple people in the room who are trying to fill in that noise. I do want to remind you about an event my colleague Paul Kupiak will be hosting. Will digital currencies and fintech shape the financial system of tomorrow? It's Friday, January 28th, and you can sign up to view it at aei.org/events. Early on in the pandemic, AEI had an all-hands meeting where we got together virtually, or digitally, I might prefer. And our president, Robert Doar, talked about what he thought the pandemic held for AEI as an institution and for all of us. We're quite used to now pandemic operations, and I appreciate all who have helped put together this event. And at the end of this call, he memorably talked about how much he looked forward to ever in returning to the building, because Robert Doar likes people. AEI is the type of organization where principled disagreements are allowed. I don't think people are that great. But we do look forward to the day when we can have you, our audience, together with us to have an even more lively conversation about the many, many issues which we've barely covered in this area. So thanks to you, my panelists, Chris Giancarlo, Kara Calvert, Jerry Brito, and Miller Whitehouse Levine. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll see you again hopefully soon.